Is it you or is it me? Hi, I'm Allison Whitmire with Learning in Action, here to talk to you today about the foundation of emotional intelligence. And it might not be quite what you think it is. You see, we at Learning in Action believe that emotional intelligence matters most in relationship and under stress. You see, if we are lying on a beach by ourselves, drinking a Mai Tai, reading a fashion magazine, emotional intelligence really doesn't play a factor in our experience. Emotional intelligence matters most in those challenging interpersonal conflicts, in relationship, under stress. You see, emotional intelligence really only exists in the context of a relationship. And in a relationship, there's me, the self, and there's you, the other. And emotional intelligence is really only tested in relationship and under stress. So there's self under stress, there's other under stress, and then there's this stressful, challenging situation between us. And that's what self-other orientation captures. It is self-other orientation that is the foundation of emotional intelligence. And no one other than Learning in Action articulates self-other orientation as a defining aspect of emotional intelligence, and no instrument other than the EQ profile measures self-other orientation. So what is self-other orientation and why does it matter? Well, simply, self-other orientation is where we focus during an interpersonal conflict. You see, during an interpersonal conflict, we can tend to focus more on ourselves or more on the other person. Self-other orientation is simply where we focus when we're in a relationship under stress. We can focus on ourself, that's self-orientation. We can focus more on the other, that's other orientation. When we are more self-oriented, our tendency is to focus on ourself, our wants, our thoughts, our feelings, our responsibility. When we are more other-oriented, we tend to focus on the other person's thoughts, their wants, their feelings, their responsibility. Now, to understand self-other orientation, we have to forget everything we think we know about what self-focused means and what other-focused means. Self-focused does not mean selfish, and other-focused does not mean altruistic. Self-other orientation is simply where we tend to focus during a relationship that's under stress. So why does self-other orientation matter? Well, as Tony Robbins says, your life is controlled by what you focus on. Where we focus during a conflict reveals where we look for what's wrong and who is responsible. You see, whether we realize it or not, consciously or unconsciously, during an interpersonal conflict, we are asking ourselves two questions. Who is at fault and who is responsible for fixing it? When we are more self-oriented, we tend to feel that we're at fault and we'll feel responsible for fixing it. When we are self-oriented, our focus is inside ourselves. And that is where we look for fault. And that is where we find it, because that is where we look. We take responsibility for the situation. And the ability to respond lies within us, because that is where our focus is. The challenge with this is we can tend to take too much responsibility. And in doing so, we sidestep the possible fault of others. We do the work that is others to do, and in doing so, we enable others. When we are more other-oriented, our tendency is to see the fault being with the other, because that is where we're focused. And we will tend to feel that the responsibility for fixing it is with the other, because that is where we're focused. We're focusing outside ourselves. And in doing so, we identify the fault as not ours, it being theirs. We identify the responsibility as not ours, but being theirs. And we want, need, expect something or someone outside of us to change so that we can be okay. And in doing all of that, we give away our agency, we give up our power over the situation, and we can become a victim to our circumstance. Emotional intelligence lies in the balance of these two orientations. It lies in the balance of self-orientation and the ability to tune in to ourselves and what we think and feel and want, and what our fault is and what our responsibility is. And it lies in our ability to attend to the thoughts and wants and feelings of the other and their fault and their responsibility in the situation. So it lies in the balance of both focus on self and focus on other evenly. So when we have a balanced self-other orientation and we inherently ask this question of who is at fault in an interpersonal conflict, we will be able to see I have contributed and you have contributed. And when we ask ourselves the question, who is responsible, we'll be able to see that I have responsibility and you have responsibility. And in doing so, oddly, we stay connected and separate because we're in it together. So how does all this play out in the workplace? Here's an example. Pat is the CEO owner of a company with revenue generation problems. And he meets with Bill, his head of sales, and Jan, his head of marketing, to talk about why revenue is down. Pat asks Bill and Jan to diagnose what's going on with the company's revenue generation problems. Bill says, the problem is that we in sales aren't getting enough qualified leads from marketing. Jan says, it's true, the new marketing campaign isn't working as we'd hoped. We just need to give it more time. So what might be going on here? And let's look at this through the lens of self-other orientation. Well, Bill sees the cause of the problem and the responsibility for it as being outside of himself. So in this example, Bill is displaying other orientation. Jan is looking to herself for fault and for the responsibility to fix it. In this example, Jan is demonstrating self-orientation. Well, fortunately, Jan and Bill work for Pat. And Pat looks for more information and additional perspectives. The first thing Pat says is, you know, team, I've allowed our technology project to distract me from revenue generation. I've really lost my focus on it. So he is volunteering how he's contributed to revenue generation being down. He says, while it's true that our marketing program isn't working as we hoped, we all agreed we'd try something new. And Bill, I'm noticing that our conversion rates, even on qualified leads, have dropped. So Pat is reminding the team that, hey, we're all in this together and we all have some degree of shared fault and responsibility. He goes on to say, let's talk about how we can each look for what's not working in our areas and suggest some possible actions. Pat has a very balanced self-other orientation. You see, emotional intelligence is about seeking information from all perspectives. Someone who is strongly self-other oriented and balanced in both self and other is able to focus and move fluidly and iteratively from self to other to the situation at hand, from self to other to the situation at hand, gathering all the available information and all the available perspectives to look at the situation, to gather information from multiple angles, and do so without blame, without judgment, without criticism or defensiveness. And here's the thing, no matter what our orientation, and virtually all of us tend to lean more towards self or more towards other, regardless of what our orientation is, it feels right to us. And we feel right seeing things that way. And it feels right because our self or our other orientation is an adaptation to our earliest relationships. It's an adaptation that occurred so early in our childhood, we have no memory of it. So it feels right, we're largely unaware of it, and so we tend not to question it. So the work for all of us to do is to self-reflect, to notice how our patterns of focusing on ourselves or focusing on the other, of looking to the self for blame and responsibility, or looking to the other for fault and responsibility. And the work for us is to learn our orientation, to learn, are we more self-oriented or are we more other-oriented? Because it's a blind spot that we largely cannot see, and it's revealed by learning and actions EQ profile. We can watch for our orientation to show up in conflicts, and we can seek more information and more perspectives to inform our orientation. Knowing our self-other orientation can allow us to spot our patterns and how they may play out in personal conflicts in ways that don't serve us, and can help us to course correct, to stay in relationship even when it's hard. Self-other orientation is the foundation of emotional intelligence. And it is because it addresses this question we all ask when something goes on wrong in a relationship. Is it you or is it me? So what's the answer to that question? Is it you or is it me? The answer is yes. And we're in this together.